project. The most important is you as the community members. We hope that you find this to be a positive experience. We will be recording today's session and we'll make that available on Council's website for anyone that missed it. Government stakeholders that are involved with this project include the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, and I'd like to thank them for making the funds available for this camp management plan. So if there is one thing that you remember from today, it's to have your say by completing a survey. So you can go online at Kyogle's website. The link is up on the screen now, or you can obtain a hard copy from Council office. So the closing date for these surveys is Friday the 20th of August. I'd like to start today with an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Gullible people of the Bundjalung Nation. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owner groups within our local government area, the Githabul, Wallabul and Bundjalung people. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So the format for today's session, we'll start with an overview of the project and look at issues and concerns. Greg Bell will be Speaker 2 from New South Wales Department of Health, and he will discuss health concerns associated with flying foxes. Speaker 3 will be Philip Kensley from New South Wales New South Wales Local Land Services, who will discuss domestic animal health concerns associated with flying foxes. We'll then look at management options for the Kyogle Flying Fox Camp. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of each session, so you can send in your questions at any time by using the chat feature. So I'll now hand over to David Endragetto, an ecologist from GeoLINK.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks for the introduction there. My name's David. I'm an ecologist with GeoLINK, and we've been engaged by Kyogle Council to prepare the Flying Fox Camp Management Plan. So we all have a different perspective of what constitutes a challenging neighbour, and flying foxes are up there for many people. They can be very challenging just due to noise, smell, vegetation damage, and reduced amenity. I'm just going to go through them quickly, and I'm going to start with noise because it's something that's measurable. So flying foxes use sound to communicate to each other for establishing territories, parent-young interactions, and courtship. And so people who live next to a camp will know how noisy they can be. This chart is from a study from Tim Pearson and Ken Chen, and it shows the different levels of noise when a flying fox camp is present and absent. So we're talking up to 60 to 75 decibels, which is equivalent to, chit chat right in your ear, or a vacuum cleaner up at that 70 decibel level. And you can kind of see that there's a real morning and afternoon kind of peak just before fly out. And then seasonally we get changes as well, with flying foxes returning at midnight during the mating season, or during the weaning period where there's young are flightless and they stay at the camp all night chattering away. So it's, the point of this is to demonstrate that noise is a real impact, especially if you're living close to it. Odour can also be a major concern for adjacent residences. Odour is mostly established by males establishing their territories by rubbing their scent glands on trees. And the smell is worse during the mating season, after hot or rainy conditions. So it's really in March to April, sort of in particular. Droppings create work cleaning up mess. We've all had probably property damaged by droppings on it, on clothes on a clothesline, those sorts of things. And in combination with noise and smell, some people find that the whole amenity of a place can be reduced. They can also, disease is a major concern, which Greg and Phil will discuss later. And these sort of initial primary impacts, I might call them, can result in indirect impacts, including stress, and it gets exacerbated just from the stress So these are real impact that affect people's lives. So why are we here today? So Council and New South Wales Government want to reduce human and flying fox conflicts and at the Kyogle camp. And to do that, Council are developing a flying fox camp management plan, and we're focusing on that camp at Kyogle there along Fawcett's Creek, and we'll discuss that a little bit later on. In New South Wales, there's a framework for developing a flying fox management plan, and there's frameworks around threatened species in general. But the key part of that process is community involvement in developing the plan, and we want to have an informed decision when we're pulling actions together. Informed decisions, basically, so we have a good outcome. We need to find a balance between different stakeholder groups, and we really want the state government to endorse a plan, which then opens up our potential to get funding to implement the actions. So it's important to know that when it comes to managing flying fox camp, that New South Wales government has a hierarchy of intervention or management approaches, if you like, and it's based on using the lowest form of intervention first, and that's really important, and we'll discuss that a bit later on. There are 4 species of flying foxes in Australia, 3 of which include the Northern Rivers as part of their region. So this is the black flying fox, grey-headed flying fox, which is the main species we have at Kyogle, and the little red flying fox. So all 3 species are protected under New South Wales legislation, and the grey-headed flying fox is also listed at Commonwealth level due to significant population declines. So yeah, so I'll just correct myself there. So all species are protected, but the grey-headed flying fox is threatened under both state and Commonwealth legislation. So what does this mean? It's illegal to harm flying foxes or their habitat unless you have approval, basically. So flying foxes are nomadic within their range. So they've all have slightly different ranges. They kind of move across that area depending on the availability of food, particular nectar and pollen from eucalypts and paperbarks, but also rainforest fruits. This image is a little dated, but shows the general range of the grey-headed flying fox along the eastern seaboard. Camps are centred around the availability of food within a certain kind of area, generally 20 kilometres. Individuals may leave a camp at different times, depending on where food is in their local area, but also beyond their entire range. So an individual can travel from Melbourne to Gladstone, Bundaberg, within a relatively short period of time, chasing food availability. So what this kind of means is that they're one population, all moving around the landscape nomadically, and some studies have shown that the turnover at an individual camp of individuals is 17% for grey-headed flying foxes, which is why dispersal is tricky because there's different individuals constantly there each night, and we'll discuss that a little bit later on. So yeah, to understand flying fox movement, we just have a quick look at foraging resources. And so this is a map of foraging habitat quality for New South Wales, and you can really see the red is the high quality habitat, the grey is low quality habitat, and there's a real hive of red activity up in northern New South Wales, which is kind of where we are, showing that we have some good quality foraging habitat. So then if you break that data down a little bit more and you look at seasonality by monthly availability of food, we can really expect to see high numbers of flying foxes in late spring, summer, autumn sort of period where we have lots of food available compared to winter where we virtually have limited resources. But again, that's really going to depend on what's happening elsewhere within the species range. So what is a flying fox camp? So basically a place for flying foxes to congregate to rest and fulfill other life functions such as social interactions, information sharing, conception and lactation. Flying foxes have a high degree of fidelity to a campsite, so they'll really want to go back to the same site year after year, and some individuals will even return to the same branch year on year. So it's quite interesting. There's a lot of complexities from a social perspective going on there. What are camp requirements? This is really important. So They generally require riparian, vegetation that's close to waterways and generally moist kind of closed forest type, so rainforest, mangroves, swamp forest. And you can kind of, when you kind of put the picture together, you can kind of see an overlap between desirable locations for humans and desirable locations for flying foxes. So the camp needs to be in proximity to food resources. So generally within a radius, so that camp will service a radius of 20 kilometres or so of available food. Some animals move up to 50 kilometres per night, but generally we're looking at that 20-kilometre radius. So what's important is the tree that an animal chooses to roost in isn't important. So you might have an area of weeds, but they're still being used as roost area. So again, if you're removing weeds that are roost trees, you're kind of impacting the species, and so you need approval for that activity. So we'll take a quick look at Kyogle Camp. So the camp is associated with the riparian vegetation along Fawcett's Creek, and this map it shows that vegetation in red, and this map also shows council land. So the sorry, the habitat is in green, but the council land is that light shade of blue, which you can see running from the showground all the way up to the north to behind the golf course. The Kyogle camp has a long history with the community reporting the camp being in that general area, not necessarily where it is now, but in that general area for over 50 years. And the main roost basically has shifted over time. Sometimes it's been near the showground, sometimes it's been where it is in its present location, which is currently behind the golf course. Behind the tennis courts, the caravan park, and the sports field. So it kind of is moving in that eastern side of the recreation reserve, following that riparian zone, and just shifting over time in that zone. There are historical records of it being more permanently based at the showground, and so we kind of see that transition over time. But the reality is, the animals may move throughout that broader area over time. So for this plan, we want to think of it as a single unit. So yeah, there's the current primary roost footprint is showing in that red circle. The current secondary roost areas, so areas that the blind foxes aren't there permanently but frequently, are showing in the yellow circles, which is behind the showground and then behind the golf course. So flying fox numbers, what do we have at Kyogle? So this data is from the National Flying Fox Monitoring Program, and which occurs 4 times per year, and this data is covering from about 2012 to present. The grey-headed flying fox is the main species known at the site, and the black flying fox is a regular visitor, and to a lesser extent though. The little red flying fox occurs, but on occasion. So we saw a big event earlier this year, large numbers of flying foxes at the camp, and that's probably happened. What been reported on sort of a 7-year cycle at Kyogle, and yeah, so just large numbers of animals for a short period, but kind of moving in quickly and then disappearing quickly as well. Typically, the flying foxes are there on a permanent basis at Kyogle, and we see fluctuations between 50 to 10,000 animals. But there are periods of peak occupation, which, so for example, in 2013, it was estimated to be 120,000 individuals, but that period was short-lived. So if we just think back to that previous slides with the food resources, we're just seeing animals come and go into the area depending on food availability, and it's pretty much permanently occupied. So we can pretty much assume that there's food resources available annually for some animals, and when we have more food, we see more animals come in. So the main areas of conflict for humans and flying foxes at Kyogle, or I guess interaction is probably a better word, is the recreation reserve, which includes the caravan park, the walkway along the creek, and the tennis courts, and then some other more passive recreation areas such as the labyrinth and the gardens there. We then have the showground, And if we just kind of take a think about that at present, the flying foxes aren't so much near the showground, but at times they can be, and there's definitely a potential for them to be there. So that's just something to keep in mind, that it may not be a current problem, but it's something that could be a future option, which future issue, which we want to capture in this plan. What else do we have? We have residential areas. So I'm sure if you're these people and you live near the camp, you would be very aware of it. The noise and smell and odor, which we discussed previously. And last of all is Apex Park, which has kids playground basically. Yeah. So I've kind of gone through that a bit quicker than anticipated. But Greg Bell is going to give us a chat now. He's from New South Wales Health. If you just bear with us 1 second, he's just going to upload his slides. In the meantime, but if anyone has any questions, you can send your questions through using the speech chat function. So if you look on the top of your Teams viewer, you'll see a little speech bubble. If you click on that speech bubble, you can type in your question and yes, send it through basically. I'll hand it over now to Greg.
Thanks, David. Can you actually see my slides? Yep.
Yep, it's all working well, Greg.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time today, and it's my pleasure to be here. In a way, it's nice to get a bit of a break from COVID, which has been taking my whole the whole lives just at present. So these issues are really important, and so we're happy to be here for that. Just trying to, so flying foxes. So I guess David sort of covered a lot of things, and I'll sort of just quickly go through. So you see, over the years, the issue has been, are they a friend or are they actually a foe? And in some ways, it depends a little bit on where you're coming from. But I mean, I myself personally, see the fact that they're an animal, they're around the place, they're quite vital in spreading pollen and a whole range of things. But we do sort of run into them in certain areas that where interaction takes place, and it becomes a bit of an issue. But we've sort of got to remember some of the stats, that they comprise 1/5 of the world's total mammal species. Australia has 75 species of bats. I mean, they may have discovered a few more since I put this together. They're very social animals, and a lot of this David's sort of covered pretty well, and they get in large colonies and camps, and the camps are often a little bit, they come and go and things like that. There's often some residents, and then there's some that come in and out, and maybe be bits of delinquents in some cases, we would say. And as mentioned, the areas, the ones that we mainly come in contact with, the black and the grey and the little red, and the speckled one is further up north, so it doesn't really apply much. So what's all the fuss about, you might say? So due to many and varied reasons, bats and humans cross paths. Humans, and I guess that's where health comes into it in a way, not in a way, but in a practical way, because there are some sort of diseases and some threats that get passed on from animals to. In most of our diseases, there, as I pointed out, are from human to human. And as Phil and some of our veterinary colleagues always say, don't forget the animals catch things from humans as well. So, but in this case, we're talking about zoonoses, where we can pick up things from certain animals. And in this case, we're talking about our friends, the bats. So, but what we've got to keep in mind, and that's why I've been, we've been sort of dealing with these things, and I've been dealing with a sort of intergovernment group down at Maclean since about 2003, I think, where the school was built there, and people thought they were building in a lovely rainforest spot, and it was. It's very nice. But then also, due to pressures, certain flying foxes moved in, and that became a bit of a conflict, and we're still working through. But the planning process and having a plan in place and getting everyone up to speed on knowing what's going on is very important. That's why I count these get-togethers like we're having now and getting a plan together. So I commend Kyogle Council and DPIE for sort of looking at this, because you're better to have it worked out so everyone knows what's going on right from the beginning. So there is legislation, and it's both Commonwealth, state and territory laws, and they cover endangered species, and I think that's all been mentioned, so I'll just quickly go through that. So, you know, the idea of this law is to make sure that these animals are sort of looked after, that other planning processes are in place when we're looking at, you know, where human development can actually keep going or where it can't, and then the protection. So it's all in place there. So the issues seem to be, like we've sort of said, everyone sort of loves these animals, and you see cute photos, you see this, that and the other. But in many cases, people say, but not in my backyard. And that last statement only happens when it starts to be, you know, something that either keeps people awake at night or through noise or odour or whatever. So communities we've seen in the past over the years, as I said, can become bitterly divided. So we need a community or an all-agency approach, and that's what we're looking at today. But we've got to remember there's, in many cases, no quick fixes. I think the quickest fix is when you do have a good planning process at the start, where the council's on board, everyone's on board, the community are on board, and then you bring in this robust camp management guidelines that are now in place. I remember when when we were down at Maclean and we did have some input into guidelines, it was a one-pager or maybe 3 pages. I think it's about 60 pages now. I think David and a few of those will correct me if I'm wrong there. So as I'll quickly go through these, but community issues are noise, odour, adverse visual impact, where you know, the camps can gradually utilise what's the trees and then gradually denude them and have to keep moving. When I was younger, up in Queensland, on one of our properties, we had flying foxes that usually like to be near water. So the particular ones we had on our place were near a sort of a fork in the river, and they used to move up and down in a fairly big bushland area. And the good part was that they could really do a cyclic type thing. In this day and age, we seem to be, especially when they're moving towards coastal areas and populated areas because of drought and different things, they sort of can't do that cyclic thing, and that's more that's in David's area. But what we do see in nuisances, and this was just looked at, soiling of paths, pools, even rainwater tanks. People say, you know, is it dangerous, the droppings from, you know, flying foxes in my rainwater tank, in my catchment? And what my answer is there, no, it's no different to having a flock of pigeons, really, or a flock of pigeons? Don't know what it is. But anyway, a group of pigeons in your trees. There's just the same issues from droppings and that, so there's nothing particularly, same as, you know, soiling paths and things that can be cleaned, and cars, you know, cleaned and things like that. So it's not a huge issue there. There's a potential impact upon land and residential values and things like that, and upon things, those sort of areas. So from health, but there are a number of potential adverse, and I will point out potential. It means that we need to bring in separation and barriers, and then if anything does breach, we need to be able to respond fairly quickly. So the rabies is sort of always the one that comes up. That's just one of the many things that's you know, is around the world. The good thing is we don't have it in Australia. I'll just quickly go through these. Australian bat lyssavirus, it's one of the same family, and these lyssaviruses or infections. Histoplasmosis is something we have had a few cases around even this area here, and that's tied with mainly people that go caving, and it's sort of tied to, it's more of a respiratory type thing, but can develop into other issues. But that's to do with droppings and things like that from not only bats but other groups. Then there's the Hendra virus, and I might just point out, and I'm sure Phil will point this out quite quickly, that Hendra isn't directly from the bats. You know what I mean? It's not for humans. If people happen to, unfortunately, get tangled up with Hendra virus, it's via bat colonies and horses and feed troughs and then people dealing, whether they be veterinarians, very up close and personal with horses, or horse trainers or whoever, getting something from horses. So, and then Nipah virus is one that we see around the place. It can come via pigs and bats and things like that. Then a whole range of hemorrhagic type things that I'm sure people will realise you've seen those before. So, and there are fact sheets. I'll just point out, and don't worry that one there is a little bit outdated, but they have been updated. I think the latest one is 2019. So just have a look at those. This is have a quick look at those if you want to have a look at. The good point is that I can point out quickly is that the countries that are free from rabies include Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Papua New Guinea, and the Pacific nation. If you want a bit more information on bats and Australian bats and how much infection we got and things like that, this is look that up. It's actually under the Wildlife Health Australia website, and the latest one I was just looking was 2020. So in 2020 in Australia we had 20 actual bats that were actually carrying Australian lyssavirus, and in New South Wales, we had 4, and we had 5 in New South Wales. We had 3 little greys were carrying it, 1 unspecified, and there was another one that was, I think, another unspecified at the time. But in October there was 1 grey-haired flying fox in the far north up here that was found to be infected. That's October 2020. So people just need to realise that we still do have these flying foxes that are infected by these. So when people do get bitten or scratched, our rule is not to get bitten or scratched, but when you do, we have to react. And these are just very crude figures of how many people we deal with, giving them immunoglobulin and then some shots, up to 4 shots, depending on weight, if people have been bitten or scratched or it draws blood. So, so 2020, you can see 2019 was a big year there for the whole of, that's the 2 local health districts. We dealt with 109 there. So far this year, up in this area here, we've had 20, and in Mid-North Coast 7. So what if you do get bitten or scratched? You immediately wash the wound with soap and water, and for a sustained time, 5 minutes at least, and you must immediately apply a good quality antiseptic with viral action. So that actually means it's alcohol, or it has levels of iodine and that in it. So that's usually something that you can get some advice from chemists and people like that to have in the house. And of course, you seek medical attention. So the medical attention can either be your local GP, and you've got time, you've got 48 hours before we really need to start administering some of this response, or you can, if you can't get any satisfaction, go to your local ED. So the interface, the other issue is to make sure that people dealing with, bats and things like that, is actually carried out by organised animal handlers, wherever they be, and hopefully these people do the right thing and are also vaccinated as they can be. And there's also a method of checking, how their immune system is going as well. So, okay, so that's the histoplasmosis. That's a bit of a map there. Once again, these prime facts. I think the latest one is 2018. I haven't seen one for 2020, but you can see on the map of Australia how it goes along the top and down into through Queensland down into and that's more to do with Hendra, which can be spread by some of these animals. And in our area, the lowest one I had to deal with was down around Maxville, and the only other one we've had outside of Northern New South Wales Local Health District was over in Cessnock in the horse area that Hunter New England had to deal with. So Hendra, we all know with Hendra, it's the disease that I mentioned earlier. We've had a number of people sort of been involved with it over the years. I think at least 7 people have died from Hendra. It was tied into. We originally saw it back in 1994 with that horse trainer Vic Rail and his offsider were with a group of horses in a confined area, and that was in Hendra in Queensland, and that was the first noted case. And since then, there's been other cases, and I think the last person that actually passed away was 2009. So it's something. At present, there's no actual. Once you get the disease, like any of these lists of virus, once you actually contract the disease, they can only be treated, and there's no actual cure. So it's not. And it also there's a human interface there. Other people have to be involved, and Phil will give a good rundown on the veterinary side of it as well. So the take-home messages is take care when dealing with bats. Although they're cute, they're still sort of wild animals, and as long as we sort of remember that, there's several, as I've mentioned, highly fatal diseases that can be linked to bats. We need to work hard as a community to live in harmony with all animals, including bats, and I'm sure we all do that. And we need to also have as many barriers in place between humans and the bats. And this is where having a plan in place is important. I'm sure someone else will mention a little bit about that. You can do certain things. You can, trim back trees, not have certain trees in an area. You can have areas where the bats will want to go to in future times and things like that. So, and from health's point of view, we just keep saying the same thing. Don't get bitten or scratched. Leave it up to the experts. If you do accidentally carry out get onto people, as I've said. If you want more info, just go on New South Wales Health, the A to Z, just and look up whichever one of these diseases you want to look up. You can also look up fact sheets on anyone that's being treated and things like that. What we have had, and I forgot to tell people, when we have had people with very close contacts with when we've had Hendra horses in conjunction with the LLS, if we think if there's an expert committee that meets with a series of doctors from Queensland and experts from Queensland and New South Wales and from the Commonwealth, and they look at what exposure a person has had. And if they think that it's something where we should take more action and give the antibodies of that person a boost, we have what we call monoclonal antibody treatment, which is still really a little bit experimental, but they can go up to Brisbane to one of the hospitals up there, and they receive a form of therapy where they receive some help to boost their immune system in very simple terms, and that's at PA Hospital. So if you've got any issues you want to discuss later on, or over, in future times during office hours, the 1300 067 60055 is to cover, and then we've got some time for questions later on, but thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Greg. That was great. If you don't mind, just to stop sharing, and if Philip Kemsley, if you start setting up. We've had one question which you might be able to help with, Greg. So there's a comment on
David,
smell and
I'm on
odour.
the screen now.
Yep, yeah,
Smell
that's
and
right.
odour.
Yep.
Yep.
So I'm not sure if Mark missed the start of the presentation, but a common question we get is, is smell and odour a respiratory concern?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's a good one. To answer your question just straight through, no, it's not. As David pointed out, from an ecologist point of view, the most odour is just to do with the colony, to do with the males with their territories and things like that. However, a colony that's been established for a fair while, you do get urine type smells. You do get smells from the feces, and but as far as that, the odour causing issues, there's been lots of research done on odour, and it's probably still going on, but it's not seen to be an issue. Physical type blowing of feces and things like that from not only bat camps, but from feedlots or anything like that can be an issue. So, no, there's no real issue there from a public health point of view.
Oh, that's great.
Don't forget, any of the things I say you can also run by your local doctor as well. My background is, I'm not a GP. My background is environmental health, and which is the interface with all environmental happenings, the health of people. So, I can't have the final medical say on things. So, but thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Don't forget to put through your questions using that chat function if you've got anything. So it's just that little speech bubble. We'll now move on. So Dr. Philip Kemsley from Local Land Service is a district veterinarian based at Lismore, and he'll give us our presentation on flying fox and livestock interactions.
Good, thank you, David. Can you all hear me and see me okay?
Yep, it's all working perfect.
Great, thank you. What I'm going to do today is focus on practical implications of for risk assessment for both Hendra virus and for lyssavirus with domestic animals. I can't do that without considering the environmental factors and the people factors, and they've already been very well covered by our previous two speakers. Nonetheless, we'll consider those as we go along. Okay, local land services. Why are district veterinarians involved with flying foxes and with bats and with other wildlife? It's basically because we do get spillover events of the diseases we've mentioned, Hendra virus and lyssavirus, into species from time to time, and we're going to look at those each of these factors, how the bats move in the environment, how that and impacts on how those diseases spill over. Our role as district veterinarians is basically biosecurity. That includes emerging diseases and zoonoses. We also interface with a lot of other organisations, and I'm quite regularly involved with Greg and doing triage for risk assessment. Over the last 3 decades, I've been working with those two diseases. I've been involved in wildlife disease events, including the heat and starvation events with flying foxes, which can be a very busy time for us. I'm involved with the Hendra virus research team, which involves universities from all around the world. And also I'm on the Communicating the Risks of Bats working group for New South Wales, working with New South Wales Health. We've seen this triangle many times of recent, but I basically work in the middle of that triangle, focusing, of course, more on the domestic animals, but we can't ignore wildlife or people. Okay, a little bit about the bats. We've already covered this, but we've got 3 in this district that are that occur from time to time. We've seen this map already in various forms, but we live right where the 3 species interface. The interesting thing is, prior to '93, we had no black flying foxes in this area. They've been encroaching. They're a Queensland bat, and they've been encroaching into New South Wales territory. So think of it as a state of origin. The grey-headed flying fox has been endemic in this area for a long, long time, and it's the main species to overwinter on the north coast. The black flying fox is more of a Queensland tropical species, and it's our carrier of Hendra virus. More of that shortly. And the little red comes and goes in very large numbers. We call them smash and grab merchants. They come in, they destroy the local trees, really cause headaches for people and the local flying foxes, and then move on. And typically that's in January and February. Flying foxes are on the decline, and in our local area, the loss of winter feed sources, which is the coastal heathland, which of course is now going under mega houses and mega development on the north coast and southeast Queensland. Every species is driven by the period of least feed availability, and for flying foxes, that is winter. The heat stress events. There are hundreds of flying foxes in that image. There's 3 of them in the air, but every other flying fox is dead. During this, the other time that we see increased risk is during starvation events, and Greg's already touched on that. But during that time, we get a lot of splinter colonies form, tiny little colonies near their food source because they're too weak to travel very far, and they start exploring new and novel and sometimes even toxic food sources. During that time, and we saw it winter 2 years ago, we see a lot of interface between flying foxes, companion animals, and humans. Typically, it'll be a cat microbat interaction, or a dog flying fox interaction. And of course, there's a temptation for people to pick them up. Flying foxes are all about food. Even though they're called fruit bats, their predominant food source is nectar and pollen. Pollen gives them the protein. It's 27 to 30% protein, and that's what drives them. They've got to have that energy and protein in order to keep alive. And in the case of the little reds, they feed on flowers, not fruit. If they're on fruit, they're in trouble. The history of lyssavirus, I can still recall it first happening, was diagnosed here locally at Wellingbar Laboratory when we had that laboratory, and it was a young female flying fox, black flying fox. It's been in Australia for millennia, and all the genetic studies confirm that. Putting this in perspective, lyssavirus is one of a group of about a dozen different rabies viruses worldwide. We have got it in terms of risk at very, very low, considering that in third world countries, a child dies every 9 minutes from rabies, basically from dog attack. Consider the risk matrix of it all. We've had 2 spillovers of lyssavirus into domestic animals, and that was in 2 horses in Queensland in 2014. Outside of that, we've had no record. So the consequence versus likelihood ratio puts it up around here. So the likelihood is very, very rare. Oh, my apologies, wrong corner. And the consequence rating, yeah, in that case was negligible for people. For the horses, it was over here, of course. The main take-home messages with lyssavirus is camp location becomes important during starvation events and during heat stress events. Outside of that, it's not really related to how close you are to a camp. And Greg's already covered off on the human side of things. But if your pet is bitten or scratched, seek veterinary advice. The vaccine is readily available. As recently as a few weeks ago, we had a lyssavirus confirmation in our local area. You can see the postcode there. It might look familiar. Flying foxes with lyssavirus have rabies-type signs. It's basically neurological signs, and they're seen in unusual places during the daytime. Please don't go near them. Okay, Hendra virus. Here's my favourite shot. It's a Hendra virus infected property. There we have the feces of a horse that died of Hendra virus. We've got broadleaf paspalum, which means it's growing under the shade of a tree. We have fruit of a narrow-leaf fig. We have the spats of the same fig. And rising like a phoenix out of the ashes, we have a couple of gold-top mushrooms. We've already covered this, the Vic Riles case. I was involved with that all those years ago. On the North Coast, I've been involved in about half the cases. They've occurred from Kempsey north to the border, and we've had 22 holdings involved in that time, with 24 horse deaths. We've only had 2 incidents of horse-to-horse transmission and no human cases on the North Coast. The most recent case was near Yukai last year. This is interesting. That's a spike we had in 2011, unprecedented. And it was, I feel, related to a flying fox starvation event that occurred the preceding 18 months. And accounted for that spillover event. These are our means of transmission of Hendra virus. It basically circulates within the flying fox population. We get spillover to horses. Horses are the amplification host. They're the most sensitive animal to picking up the virus, and they blow the virus up so much so that they become a threat to other horses, dogs, and we've got had a couple of dogs that have been infected, and to people. Again, consider your risk matrix. So if you're on the showground committee and considering the risks and consequences, feel free to have a chat with me. I've done that for a number of sites as to how you can best handle that. Bat-to-bat transmission we've spoken about. There's not much we can do about that, other than to say that it comes in waves, like all viruses. Bat to horse, that's my first case in 2011 that I dealt with dead horses. That frightened the living daylights out of me because of the amount of contact that I had with the virus. But it was from a fig tree, in this case a strangler fig, and 2 horses. The companion horse died a couple of weeks later as well. And again, I had contact with that horse. And then we've consider the reasons why it spills over from a bat to a horse, very much related to the urine of black flying foxes. So when we do our risk assessment, we need to be able to deny horses immediate contact, sniffing the urine of the black flying fox. That's the risk. Horse-to-horse transmission, we need to look at just how much contact they've had. We need to consider close contact as being within 5 metres. And this is critical to understanding the link between horses to horse and horse to people. If that distance is observed, the risk is very, very low from all the work that's been done. These are the signs in horses. It's basically a textbook full of signs: respiratory, neurological, and colic are gut associated. So if horses are seen sick, particularly if they're not vaccinated, contact your vet, particularly if there's been people contact in the preceding 3 days. A very quick look at in-contact horses, because that's going to be of interest to folk locally. There are 3 in-contact horses from the nearest case that we've had to Kyogle back a few years ago, which was approximately halfway between Kyogle and Casino. It's important to look at a biosecurity plan, looking at all those possible risk factors and the means of transmission: bat to horse, horse to people, horse to horse. All those need to be considered. There's some things that we can do to prevent infection. These are some of the things we can do to minimise the risk from horse to horse. And from horse to people, basic biosecurity, and I'm sure you're all familiar with preventing virus and the use of disinfection in terms of preventing that. I'll now pass it back to the moderator. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Phil. That was great. If you don't mind, we'll stop sharing your screen there if you've got a second. If you can stay with your camera on, and Greg, if you can turn your camera on if possible. Does Kirsty, have we have any questions there?
We've just had one about the flying fox preferred habitat and plants. And then we've had another little one just about the camps and how they can help protect or help manage the interactions between livestock and animals.
Sure. I might answer the first question. So in terms of species list, so I guess there's 2 questions there. One's, are we talking about roosting habitat or foraging habitat? So I'll start with foraging habitat. So there's probably, there's a broad range of eucalyptus and paperbark species that flying foxes like for nectar and pollen, and we're probably talking, off the top of my head, in the order of 50 to 100 plants. There's actually information available on the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment's website. If you type in flying foxes, they've got pages and pages of information there. When we're talking about roosting habitat or camps, the preference is definitely those more closed canopy locations, close to waterways generally, and like nice, moist, cool microclimates. So there's we touched on it a bit earlier, and there's a bit more information if you look on the Department of DPIE New South Wales website. You'll find some more information there. To that second question, did you want to answer that one, Phil?
Yeah, sure. I'm just on the foragers. When we do assessments of an infected property for Hendra virus, I'm responsible for doing the foragers, and we're finding new things all the time. These animals are seeking out more and more sources. Just a couple. Fiddlewood leaf, chewed up and spat out, was the source of one of ours. Camphor laurel has come up. Davison's plum, red flowering eucalypts from the ornamental ones from Western Australia was the most recent one. So, oh man, it's just changing all the time in that space. Now, in terms of protecting livestock, protecting horses with from Hendra virus. There's a bucket load of things we need to do. The information's on the DPI website, but it may even be something as simple as keeping horses out of orchards, because we had one just down the road from me that was involved in both the horses snooping around mandarin trees, and the flying foxes were flying low, and these were only trees that were 1.5 meters high. And that was the source of spread. So it's difficult. Vaccination is the key. In the fringe areas, and I call Kyogle a fringe area because we've only had one spillover event near Kyogle. We've got to consider a lot of other factors like covering where the horses are at night, and keeping away from where bats might feed.
I think you're on mute then, David.
Sorry about that, just talking to myself. So I've got another question. I'll direct it to you again, Phil. So can vaccinated horses still contract and or transmit Hendra disease?
Yeah, again, it's a moving space, and there's been research work being done in that area. Vaccination is our best means of protecting horses and ourselves from Hendra virus. Have we seen horses that have been exposed to Hendra virus go on to survive and produce antibodies? Yes, we have, and that happened at the Casino Kyogle spillover event there a few years ago. With this group of viruses, and I include distemper in dogs and measles in humans, we can have the virus sit there in the body, and then at a later date cause what we call recrudescence, and that can be months later. Very rare with Hendra virus, but it's now been documented, particularly with the Casino Kyogle case. There is not virus shedding happening during that time. So no, they are not exposing people. That horse was unvaccinated. We have no evidence that vaccinated horses are shedding virus, but the ability to actually put that to the test is very, very difficult indeed, given the logistics of actually doing that work.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It really highlights it's really an evolving space we're working in, and new information's coming all the time, and the challenge in getting information. So we have another question. Does council have a requirement for horses using the showground / other council land to be vaccinated against Hendra? I might be able to help with that one. My understanding is there are 3 main horse users at the showground at Kyogle, between the Pony Club, the show committee, and the drafting, and the radio actually, and there's a strong recommendation, but it's not actually a requirement. So it's it's quite interesting. Is there any more questions there? I think that's all of them. Is that right, Kirsty?
No more questions.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll continue on with the presentation, and there'll be another opportunity to ask questions a little bit later on. So yeah, feel free to keep them coming through. All right. So now we're going to move into talking about camp management actions. So the state government, they basically have ranked actions into 3 categories, level 1 being the lowest form of intervention, and moving down to level 3, which is more severe intervention. Level 1s are about routine camp management and indirect impacts. Level 2 is more managing the camp in situ, like where the camp is, and involves works around the camp. So the camp stays there, but you're just kind of working around it. Level 3 is more higher level, and that's about moving flying foxes. If we remember earlier in the presentation, the state government requires camp management plans and camp management in general to consider a hierarchy of the lowest form of intervention, so that they want to see level 1 actions implemented before you move down the order to level 2 and level 3. Can't we just get rid of them? It's a very common question. So flying foxes are an iconic native species. They're part of Australia's unique biodiversity. They're pollinators for a large number of Australian plants, and really critical in that role. Spread genetic material between plants over huge distances. So as we discussed, grey-headed flying fox can be down at Melbourne and then move all the way up to central to North Queensland over a matter of days and carry that pollen and genetic material with them. They also play a critical role in commercially important hardwoods through that pollination kind of duty, which is really an environmental service, and so therefore they have a bit of an economic value to us. And in some instances, camps present ecotourism opportunities. Okay, there's numerous things we need to consider when we're weighing up what actions to apply, and I just want you to just consider these when you're later selecting your preferred options as part of the questionnaire. So the state policy that we've touched on, competition for funding, and costs. So they're kind of really important to consider, because there's over 300 flying fox camps in New South Wales that are known. Many of them are in urban areas along the east coast. When funding is available at a state level, Kyogle Council will effectively be competing against virtually every eastern local government area along the New South Wales coast. So if our actions are not in line with the government policy, or the costs are ridiculous and disproportional, we're just not going to get funding. We really need to be consistent with that state government policy. Are we resolving the issue, or we're just pushing it? And that's a real risk with flying foxes, because you can't tell them where to roost, and they can end up moving into less desirable locations. Actions are interrelated, so how the actions all connect to each other to address the issues is really important to consider, and multiple actions may be required to address an issue. So such as noise, we might need to consider planning and planning policy, as well as modifications, as well as to buildings, and it's a whole mix of things to address an issue. Camps are interrelated, so what happens at one camp affects the next camp, basically. Food resources. So as we saw in the earlier slides, we have a vast area of food resources that attract flying foxes to the north coast. So flying foxes will be attracted to the area, and they will want to roost somewhere. And very importantly, animal welfare. It's just a huge thing to consider. So management options not being considered are culling and do nothing. Culling is not even an option nowadays. Basically, you will not get approval from the state government to do culling. They've removed that from their licensing activities, and we're here today. So do nothing is clearly not one of council's options. Just excuse me 1 second. So we'll have a look at level 1 management actions. So basically, the more we understand something, the less intimidating it is. And that's why education awareness really comes up high as a level 1 management action. It will often comes up high. So if we look at the charts we saw earlier about the population at Kyogle, we kind of see that it fluctuates up and down depending on food availability, really, which gives us and when we have those peak periods, like the little reds in the summer just gone, they came for a little while, a month or whatever, and they disappeared really quickly. So there is a bit of a reassurance knowing that when there is a problem, it's not going to be there for forever. You know, education awareness may include providing advice on how to live with flying foxes, appropriate netting fruit trees, removing food trees from your garden that may attract them and then cause, you know, mess at your property or noise at night, those sort of things. Positioning of clotheslines. Education may also include about stock management, which we kind of have touched on earlier, cleaning out the showground or the adjoining rural properties. So about eliminating potential for horse flying fox interactions. It might be about informing tourists staying at the showground or the caravan park at the rec reserve, just letting them know the flying foxes camp is there and giving them an informed decision before they book a site and, you know, potentially get upset for the smell or noise later on. There's a whole heap of mediums that education awareness can be brought out, but you know, it is acknowledged that it's not going to resolve all problems, and so we need to take additional actions. You know, education alone is not going to stop the smell or the noise at night. So other management actions may be required. I've kind of grouped these three together: property modifications with or without subsidies, and service subsidies. And I'll explain them a bit more now. So all of them combined or separate are about making lives easier for people living next to a camp by either modifying the residence or providing financial relief, basically. So there's a whole range of opportunities within that spectrum. So it can be as simple as council providing a pressure cleaner that's hired out so residents can clean driveways and things. Other councils have adopted that approach and it's been quite used by the community. Cars and clothesline covers, carport covers. These kind of things become, you know, we're scaling up to more expensive and more expensive measures, really. Moving right the way up to home renovation, such as insulating bedrooms and double glazing them, basically to reduce those noise impacts. And you know, there are a few residences in proximity between the caravan park and on the southern side of Fawcett's Creek there, that these sort of actions may be appropriate for in the Kyogle instance. Other property modifications might be about covered water points at the showground for livestock, especially when the shows are on and there's 150 horses at the showground camping there overnight. But also about rural, rural residents in that in the general community. It could even this kind of property modification could extend to council assets even, such as putting a cover over the playground at Apex Park. So really simple stuff. We know the fly out is going to be pretty concentrated around that camp, so we can kind of really target those areas that are more likely to have droppings land on them. You know, within a reasonable radius, and they're the challenges to define. I just want to give an example. So if we go back to that Pearson and Cheng noise study earlier, these two charts are from a house, single house. One room has acoustic treatments, so double glazed windows and insulation, and the other one didn't. So you can really see the noise levels were substantially lower where they had those treatments. Basically, and the state government has adopted these or funded these types of initiatives at other camps. So who pays for such improvements is a very critical question. And we're not saying council will pay for these, but I'm just going to give a couple of examples. So council's involvement and support could range from supporting development applications or waiving DA fees for flying fox related improvements, just doing grant applications and really combining them to help do multiple asset applications at once rather than individuals looking for grant money. Rate subsidies, about providing relief for those living next to the camp who might have higher electricity or water needs due to, you know, using clothes dryers rather than hanging the clothes out because of the dropping, and they basically have a higher cost of living due to living next to the camp. It may be about preparing. Yeah, sorry, I've already covered that one. So as a society, we should consider financial mechanisms that help those who are disadvantaged by things that provide us with environmental and financial benefits. It's just something to consider. Routine camp maintenance and operational activities. I've kind of grouped in protocols into this kind of discussion. So they're different activities, and you'll see that when you do your questionnaire a bit later on. But it's really about how we manage that land around the camp and how we interact with flying foxes. So when we're just say we want to, there's a pipeline, council utilities that runs adjoining the camp, or we're redoing the tennis courts, or doing some work to the showground, the caravan park, sorry, or the showground even. How are we doing that work so we're not just disturbing the flying foxes? They're then disturbing the neighbours because they're making noise and droppings. It's about managing those activities really. In relation to protocols, so we can have protocols for how we do works, but also how we manage incidents such as heat waves events. I know there's very active wildlife groups in the area, but it's really it's formalising those processes and combining the relevant stakeholders. So combining council and the wildlife rescue groups and the showground. So there's a real clean. It's got to be. It can be simple line of passage there. I'll move on. So creation of alternative habitat. So this is a tool that's often used to encourage flying foxes to move away from areas of conflict. It also helps provide resilience to flying fox populations with denser vegetation, providing a cooler microclimate. So it's kind of multiple benefits to increasing the resilience of flying foxes, the vegetation that they roost in, as well as the community by hopefully moving them on. You can't tell a flying fox where to go, but it's a good starting point, and we're kind of quite favourable in the Kyogle instance, where there's a large stand of council managed land which is not used for any activities at the moment, slightly to the north, behind the golf course. And the flying foxes have been known to use that area. So that's probably a prime candidate. If you were to adopt this approach, that land there is a prime candidate. And obviously you wouldn't push it too far north, so then the problem becomes an issue to the residents north of the golf course. So it's really about finding that balance. But there's opportunities for it at Kyogle. Artificial roost structures or artificial roost habitat is probably not that relevant to our camp because we have native vegetation. That might be something that a Sydney camp might adopt, where it's completely surrounded by an urban environment. Land use planning. So this is about, I guess it's about considering future land uses or renovations and developments of people's houses, and making the houses more resilient to flying fox impacts. We can kind of see from this illustration, which is basically the LEP zoning, so the local land use zoning, and a 300-metre buffer around the existing camp footprint. And we can kind of see that there's a lot of residential land, so about 110 lots, and most of it's been developed. There's a few empty lots there, but it's about having those mechanisms in place so you notify people that there is a flying fox in the camp in the area and help them make decisions to make more, I guess you could call it living next to flying fox sensitive designs, which doesn't have to be complex. Positioning of clotheslines, not under potential food trees, just really simple stuff. But having that as part of a planning mechanism, whether it's councils or online mapping, just something to bring awareness. A development control plan saying if you're in this zone, you should consider flying foxes. Just little triggers like that to prompt people. Yeah, just something to consider. So we'll just move into level 2 management actions, and here we're talking about creating separation between people and residences or conflict areas. And there's multiple approaches, but the main focus is removing vegetation at a roost, or putting up devices that encourage flying foxes to move not great distances, but just enough to provide a bit of a buffer. And that's really been adopted broadly using aerial sprinklers, which provide both a noise stimulus when the sprinklers turn on and they make the foliage kind of shake and whatnot, but also a visual stimulus with the leaves moving. There's a number of attempts of that elsewhere, so there is a footprint to work from there. How far should a buffer be is a very tricky question, and you want to avoid pushing the camp so far that it impacts other residents or other stakeholder groups. And the reality is, it's unlikely that you create a buffer substantial enough to avoid noise or odor impacts. Really, you'd have to move camps, 300 odd meters, which really pushes into that level 3 actions. Buffers are more along the lines of, is the flying fox roosting above my head? Above my house, let's just create a little bit of separation so I'm not getting branches dropped on my roof all night, all those sorts of things. And we're fairly lucky at Kyogle, just the nature of the topography and then the way the land's been managed. So the houses on the southern side of Fawcett's Creek, there's already a bit of a buffer there with the levee bank. Apex Park Showground isn't shaded by trees. Around the back of the tennis courts, it's already been trimmed. Around the back of the caravan park, it's already been trimmed. So in most instances, there is an existing buffer around most receivers in Kyogle, which is fairly fortunate. Level 3 actions are about dispersing the animals by different means, such as vegetation removal or noise or disturbances such as noise, smoke, sound. The big issue is that dispersal is not very effective. As we discussed previously, each night a portion of individuals at a camp, there's a turnover of individuals. So if we're looking at 17%, you made noise and disturbed these flying foxes, but there's other individuals coming into the area. So there's just a turnover. So dispersal attempts need ongoing effort, and they need substantial costs associated with that and approvals. I'll discuss it a bit more in the next couple of slides, but it also dispersal often results in the shifting the problem rather than resolving it by the camp moving closer to residents or making a new camp in a conflict zone. And importantly, there's huge animal welfare considerations associated with dispersal. So I know that people often like to just jump to dispersal as the option when they're going through the plan options, but it's important to consider other options. So we're kind of running out of time a little bit, so I'll quickly run through a couple of case studies. So Roberts and Eby reviewed 17 flying fox camp dispersal events. In general, the flying foxes didn't leave the area. Most didn't move far. They couldn't predict where the flying foxes were going to move. Repeated effort was required. Substantial cost was required. And the conflict wasn't resolved in 71% of cases. In the Sutherland Shire, at the Corella camp, the council put in some buffers, which was 10 to 15 metres. They still got complaints. They put in greater buffers, 20 metres, costing them a bit more money. Still didn't resolve the issues. They went for dispersal. They had to do maintenance dispersal because the flying foxes came back for a 2 to 3 year period. The cost was substantial, and the flying foxes kept on coming back. and the whole experience didn't resolve the issue, basically. So it resulted in temporary absences, and the flying foxes just returned. They increased the buffer again, and basically, they put a lot of effort into moving the flying foxes, and it just hasn't been effective for them, and it's been costly. So you've got your opportunity now to fill out the questionnaire, which is available online or hard copy, as we discussed previously, and it closes on the 20th of August. This is important. It's an important part of the process, so we really want you to have your say. There are 3 parts to the questionnaire or the survey. One's talking about your interaction with the camp, so how you use the showground, how you use the recreation reserve, and whether you whether you live locally, those sorts of things. The next section is about how flying foxes impact you and your values, and then the third part is about management options, and you get to select your preferred management options, which have all been taken from the state government policies and camp management guidelines. We've had a couple of questions. So the survey's been available for a few days now, and we've had a couple of concerns about question 9. So question 9 asked you to rate your top 5 options, and so you just need to click 5 options from your most preferred to your least preferred, and you can sort of see along the top column there. There's the numbers, so 1 to 5, and you can only select one activity or one action, once. So any questions there? I might just stop presenting briefly, and if Phil and Greg can come back. So have we had any questions there, Kirsty?
We had Nev ask about flying foxes drinking from his dam and the safety of that water to then swim in and irrigate with.
Okay. I'll leave it to either of you to answer that one, Phil or Greg.
Well, from a public health point of view, it's no different. As I said before, you need an awful lot of animals to sort of contaminate your dam. You've got to really be careful swimming in dams. The biggest issue is sort of getting E. coli type things. That's where you've got animal feces of any kind in large amounts in a small amount of water, can give anything from eye infections through to upset tummies and things like that. Cryptosporidium, something that can be spread that way. But just for flying foxes, there wouldn't be any worse than having, or no different, in our opinion, to having other animals. You just got to be sensible, and you could get sore throats and things like that. So no, from our, and salmonella sort of things like that. If you actually ingest things like the feces floating on the top of water, but that'd be the same for other animals as well. So, Phil, what do you want to say there on that one?
Yeah, just from the livestock point of view, no, that's not the way that either hendrovirus or lyssavirus behave. Lyssavirus, the animal's got to be bitten or scratched. And in the case of hendrovirus, the horse has to be basically sniffing the urine. So no, stock water's not an issue.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So I've got another question here that I can see. Did they move closer to town when the work was done on the levee? When did they relocate closer to town? So my understanding is about 20 years ago. There's history of the Flying Fox Camp being in that general area for over 50 years. On the western side of the railway line and Sumland Way, behind the showground. That at some points in time that has been the core area, but for the last, my understanding from what community reports are, about 20 years ago, they've kind of moved more or less where they are now behind the recreation reserve on the eastern side of Sumland Way and the the rail corridor. So really, but moving up and down that zone, and that's fairly normal behaviour for flying foxes, especially when there's a range of habitat available. We're kind of fortunate at Kyogle where the flying foxes can do their thing. Should they defoliate the plants enough, they've got enough habitat they can kind of come and go and move and choose where they want to roost. Yeah, so my understanding is the levee work doesn't really affect where they are, or hasn't affected where they are. So another question, what successful cases are there following relocation to another established ecosystem within the problem region? That's a very good question, and it's I guess there's two parts to that question. One is, my understanding is you're not asking about dispersal. You're asking more about, can you establish habitat elsewhere and get flying foxes to move there? There's a huge program at the moment. They've got about $3.5 million of state government money, and they're trialing that effectively. But their main priority is to tap that onto where there's an existing camp and extending habitat away rather than creating new habitat altogether. That hasn't been effective, so to speak. If you're targeting an isolated location without a history of use, that generally hasn't been, I'm going to use the word term generally because there'll probably be exceptions, hasn't been effective. But this concept of extending habitat has been effective at a number of sites, including Winghambush and at Maclean. They've sort of done a little bit of planting maybe 8 to 10 years ago. By the 8-year mark, that new plantings were being used and they were away from housing areas. So yeah, it is an effective tool. It's just got to be strategic in approach. Does anyone else have any more questions?
That's it for the questions.
All right, thank you very much there, Kirsty. And I might just go back to the slides and just summarize where we're at. So in summary, we definitely acknowledge, sorry, I'm just bring this up. Yeah, so we acknowledge that there are flying fox and human conflicts. And different people have different sensitivities to the conflicts, and we completely respect that. There are pros and cons to each management option, and we're hoping that out of today, you've now got the skills or the knowledge to help make informed decisions about what actions you think will be appropriate. And I hope we've helped answer your questions related to health and livestock, and just giving you a bit more of a fundamental understanding of flying foxes and the whole system, the state government system that we're working within. So the camp management plan will identify strategic actions and provide a funding, a platform, a direction for the management of the camp, but as well as a platform for funding. So, you can't get money. You can't get money from the bank without having a business plan. This is effectively a camp management plan is an option, is required for councils to get grant funding. Okay, so where to from here? So the questionnaires that are available online or from hard copies from council close on the 20th of August. We'll then put the draft management plan together, and that'll go on public exhibition in October. We'll have a second drop-in booth session to discuss the plan, and the details of that will get kind of nutted out in the next little while to give you plenty of notice. And that'll really duplicate when the plan is on public exhibition. So you can, if you want to write a submission, you can ask us some questions, and that might help explain the plan in a bit more detail. And finally, the aim is to get the plan adopted by council and submitted to DPI by the end of this calendar year, so in December. Yeah, so I'd just like to thank Greg and Phil for their talks today, Kyogle Council, and in particular, you guys for participating in this event. We hope you found it worthwhile, and yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. So have a good day, and thanks again.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
So just one last thing, if you want further information, there's a link to Council's website about the project, or Judy Fawkes is the Kyogle officer who spoke at the start, and that's her contact details.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.